Hi friends, it's Mr. Alex from Adams Memorial Library, and I'm back with another Art Attack craft. Now, Art Attack is our program for summer reading participants ages 11 to 18, and each week we use a different art technique to create our own masterpiece. This week, we're going to be using air dry clay to create our own Kraken or Mermaid egg. Now, this particular craft is a little bit messy, so I'm going to wear some clothes that I don't mind getting dirty and head over to my kitchen. Let me show you what we'll need to get started. Alright friends, so what we're going to need today for our DIY Kraken egg is some air dry clay, our cardboard egg, and I've already taken the label off of the bottom of mine, so if you haven't done that already, you can do it now. Some water, some paint, some things to decorate our egg with. In this case, I have these little shiny pieces, as well as some sequins, a paintbrush, and a pencil or some other sort of sharp tool to carve into our egg with. Now, I also have this heavy cardboard tube that you'll see that I'm going to use as a rolling pin. If you have a rolling pin or something else that you're okay to use with clay like that, that's totally fine, but I want to be very clear that this is optional. I'll show you two different methods for putting the clay on your egg. This is just one way that you can do it. So if you want to use a rolling pin or something else that's sturdy, you can add that to your supplies as well. All right, let's get started. All right, so while we're covering our egg, I do have this piece of parchment paper down, and this is going to help make sure that our egg and our clay do not stick to the counter while we're covering it. This is very important because otherwise, especially when we're rolling, the clay would just otherwise totally stick to the counter and we wouldn't be able to get it up in one solid piece. So I've put this piece of parchment paper down on our surface. Once we've protected the surface that we're working on, we're going to take our cardboard egg and our air dry clay, and we're going to begin covering the surface. So there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. First thing that we can do is just break off a small piece of our clay, like this, mold it onto the egg, and use our fingers and thumb to sort of work over the clay and spread it out on the surface of the egg. Now this works pretty well, so like I said, you don't need to use the rolling method that I'm going to show you next. But you just want to make sure that you are smoothing the clay out. You want to make sure that you're sealing up any bumps or cracks, and we'll talk about those later in a minute. But we just want to cover as much of it as possible without getting the clay too thin so that it doesn't crack or isn't so thin that it doesn't hold our embellishments or sequins. So at this point, I've got part of our egg covered in clay, and that's a great method to do it. The other way that you can do it does use our rolling implement. So we can take, in my case, a tube or your rolling pin, break off another piece of the clay, and flatten it out with the rolling pin. As you can see, the clay is sort of sticking to my rolling pin, so this is why the parchment paper is important. If it does stick like that, that's okay. We can just start over, rolling it nice and flat. Once we have a flat sheet of clay, like this, we're going to take it and just drape it around our egg. This technique is particularly nice because it's going to give us a nice uniform surface, but as you can see, it can be kind of problematic as the clay tends to want to stick to whatever we're rolling with. So it's totally personal preference, whatever's easiest for you and depending on what you might have around your house. But we're going to keep doing that with our clay until our whole egg is covered. So let's go ahead and do that. So at this point, we see that I now have the whole surface of the egg covered in our air dry clay, and that's really great. But it is a little bit uneven. You may have seen as I was working with it, there are bits that are a bit cracked or a bit dry, and if that happens, that's where our water comes in. So this air dry clay is exactly like regular clay if you've ever worked on a pottery wheel in art class or something like that, where if we take our water, we add it to our clay, it becomes sort of like slip, which is going to help moisten the clay. It's going to help bond the clay. So especially where you have pieces touching, so if you use the roller method and you have different pieces of the clay, or even if you just use your hands, this water is going to create slip, which will help bond the clay. And so we just want to cover our egg and use the water to make as nice and uniform a surface as possible. Now, as you can see, my hands are getting pretty messy, so this is another great reason to have some parchment paper or something else down on your surface, and to be doing this in a place where you can afford to get a little bit messy. So at this point, I'm just going to work my hands over the clay while they're wet, creating the slip until the clay absorbs the water and has a more uniform surface. At this point, my egg is nice and uniform, so I'm going to set this aside, clean off my hands, and I'll show you how to decorate. Alright, so my hands are clean. Our egg has had a little bit of time to dry up and absorb some of that water from the slip, and I've gotten our embellishments. Once again, I have these shiny pieces as well as some sequins. I also have our pencil to make our design. So what we can do is we can take, in my case, some sequins. So for instance, I have this great one that looks like a shell. And we can just go ahead and press this right into the clay of our egg to get it to stay. Now, this is one of the reasons that we don't want our clay to be too thin. If it is, it's not going to absorb the whole piece and it won't stick. We can do the same with anything else that we might have as embellishments. So if you happen to have some other decorations, some small stones or shells or something at home, this can be a great opportunity to use this as well. But just like the shell, I'm going to go ahead and press the stone right in, making sure it's nice and secure. And we're going to continue to embellish our egg. The other thing that we can do is take our pencil and make some lines or carve into our egg. So if I wanted a line like this, I could just carve it right in, smooth off the extra bits of the clay, and then we have a line like that. So I'm going to take some time and decorate my egg here. The one thing that we're not going to do right now is we are not going to paint our egg yet. Unfortunately, the acrylic paint, especially with the slip on the clay, it just will not bond. It's not going to paint. That's something that we're going to want to do after we decorate our egg and after it dries. So definitely keep that in mind. So think about where you might want to paint when you're done, and keep that in mind as you design your egg. All right, let's get designing. All right, so now you can see I did a little bit of etching in the center. I covered my egg in my different embellishments, and so it is fully decorated, minus of course the paint. Now, something you may have noticed as you watched me decorate is there were a few times where I sort of struggled with making this line, and I did it over and over a few times. And that's because it was getting to the point where I was carving the whole way down, back down to our cardboard egg, and we definitely don't want to do that. We want to make sure that any carving that we do like this stays in our clay. We don't want to go the whole way down to the cardboard, because if we do, then we're making our clay two separate pieces again, and then that won't allow it to dry properly. It'll crack. So now we have our egg. It is covered in clay. The clay has been decorated with lots of embellishments and sequins. And so now we are going to let it air dry. You're going to want to let it air dry for at least 24 hours. Sometimes it can take multiple days depending on how thick your clay layer is. So, don't stress out if it takes a little bit longer than that for it to dry. But we're just going to keep it on our parchment paper, somewhere out of the way, where no wayward pets or siblings can mess with it and, damage our egg. So we'll keep it somewhere safe for a few days, and I will see you back in the library with my finished egg. All right, so now that we have let our Kraken egg dry, mine took about 3 days to be completely dry, we are able to take it and finish it up. So what I did was, first thing is I checked for any embellishments that may have fallen off. And I took the glue that's in your kit and I just reattached any pieces that had fallen apart. Now, you may also notice that there are a few cracks throughout the egg that are not this one that I put in it. And that's because the more pieces you have of clay when you're covering the egg, the more likely it is to crack. So whenever you're covering your egg, you definitely want to get big pieces, as big as you can, to cover your egg with, and that's going to keep those cracks from happening. Once you have made sure that your clay is absolutely dry and you have reattached all of your pieces, then we are going to take some of the paint that's in your kit and we can go ahead and paint your egg. So I've chosen this cool glitter paint for mine, as well as some blue for the parts that I carved. At that point, your Kraken egg will have to dry, and then once your paint is dry, your Kraken egg will be finished. Congratulations. Once again, I want to thank everybody for watching this Art Attack video. Don't forget to keep an eye on our Facebook page and website at adamslib.org for even more awesome summer reading activities. And happy reading and crafting!